every single one of us have those movies that we can just watch over and over and over again and never get tired of them. So today I'm going to stop and share my top 10 movies that I've watched the most times. My name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your top 10 most rewatched movies. What are those ones you never get tired of, or for whatever random reason, you just happen to have seen over and over and over again. This isn't a list of my favorite movies. These are just the ones that I put on all the time, or I've been watching for a very long time. One more thing before we get started. This video is brought to you by my supporters over on Patreon. Every month I ask them to submit ideas for a Patreon video. This month they selected my top 10 movies that I rewatch the most. If you enjoy Sean Chandler Talks About and you want more content like this, consider joining over on Patreon. And there's an extended version of this video with 12 more of my most rewatched movies of all time. And let's get started. Kicking things off at number 12 is Superman 2, the extended broadcast edition on a VHS tape. So I actually gave you 2 extra of my most rewatched movies on this list. But so growing up, I'm a child of the 80s, and they would do these big event movie nights back in the day where hit movies would premiere on broadcast television, and it was a huge, huge deal. And sometimes they would amp them up by throwing deleted scenes into them. Well, if you know the history of Superman 2, the original director, Richard Donner, shot 75% of the movie while shooting Superman 1, and then after Superman 1 came out, they fired him, brought a different guy in who had to reshoot over 51% of the movie so he could be credited as the director. And so they had all these deleted scenes, and so during these broadcast runs of Superman 2 during the 80s, they plunked them back into it. And as best as I can recall growing up, some of those extra scenes were put onto the copy that I had growing up. And so when eventually it came out on DVD and I watched it, I was confused, like, where are all those shots from my childhood? All those scenes that were in here but aren't in here anymore. And then later on, the internet informed me about him getting fired, and then the Richard Donner cut came out in 2006, and I fully understood what happened. But growing up, we didn't have very many Superman or superhero movies, and so I had Batman 66, I had the Superman films, and then I had Batman 1989, and I watched them constantly, and these copies of the Superman movies that we recorded off television with the commercial breaks and everything, all kinds of distortion from the recording process. That's what I watched growing up on repeat, and I believe the one I watched the most was the one where Superman actually punched people and kicked people in the face and smashed their hands before throwing them into an endless abyss. Number 11 is Home Alone. Ironic that I should film this specifically today because today is Macaulay Culkin's 40th birthday, which starts to make me feel a little bit old, as that means I'm almost 40 years old. But I was the perfect age for Home Alone when it first came out. I was 9 when the original film debuted in theaters. I'm sure I saw it 1,000 times, and then for the 30 years since then, it's become one of those movies that we regularly watch as a family, and that was when I was growing up. That's when my wife and I were married and didn't have kids yet, and then now that we have kids, we watch Home Alone about once per day during the month of December and every couple of months during the rest of the year. I think we watched it just a month ago, actually, starting the Christmas season a little bit early. But this is one of those Christmas classics that never gets old. And because I was that first generation of prime target audience member for this movie, it'll of course always have a special place in my heart. And it's pretty cool now that my kids absolutely love this movie that I loved when I was, well, not their age because I was older than them when it came out, but when I was a child. Bringing us into our top 10 is Rocky IV. Now, I've said it many times on my channel, Rocky Balboa is probably my favorite movie character of all time, and Sylvester Stallone is probably my favorite actor of all time, and I watch pretty much all of the Rocky films very regularly, even Rocky V, but the one that probably makes the most appearances by far is Rocky IV. This is the most ridiculous of the bunch. It's basically montage the movie as it montages through most of its plot line, and then we have a final fight at the end, but it absolutely works for what it's going for if you love this franchise. It's one of those movies I just love to put on when I'm in the mood to just get pumped up, amped up. There's about 20 minutes straight of training montage in this movie of Stallone doing all these incredible feats of strength in the snow. It's just amazing. And as someone that likes to work out, likes to amp myself up before I work out, this one gets put on replay. It's just easy to digest, easy to watch film. Number 9 is Batman 1989. This is one of the very first movies I remember seeing in the theater. Summer of 1989, we had Star Trek V, we had Batman 1989, and I believe I saw Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in the theater. But the one that meant the most to me at the time and stuck with me throughout that time period was Batman 1989. I had all the collector cards. I actually still have them in a binder in a notebook that I normally keep next to my desk, but it's not here at the moment for some reason, so I can't share it with you at this time. But I had the toys, the Batman figure, and then I got the VHS copy of it whenever it came out. And I remember like there was a Diet Coke commercial with Alfred pouring a Diet Coke and then the Batmobile rushing home. And then there was this whole one about joining the Warner Brothers Club with wanting to buy a tie and then a joke about being tied up. I mean, I saw this thing on so many times rewatching it and absolutely loved this movie back in the day. Number 8 is Jurassic Park. Once again, another movie where I was that prime age for it. I was just shy of 13 when this movie came out. So dinosaurs that look real, eating people, and being just old enough that my mother would let me go see it on repeat. And then it turns out it was also just a fantastic movie. It's got all the spectacle, but it's also got great characters. It's funny, it's quotable, and it stands the test of time. Here we are 27 years later, and the effects still look great. The characters are still so good that everyone's amped that they're returning for Jurassic World 3, and we're disappointed when Ian Malcolm was only the bookends for Jurassic World 2. And so, this is one of those movies that I've always loved. I had the VHS copy. I had a DVD. I've got the Blu-ray. We very regularly put this movie in. When they did the 3D release back 7-8 years ago, my wife and I were there the day that it hit the theaters so we could see it in the theater again. She loves it. I love it. We watch this one constantly. Number 7 is Bloodsport. Depending on how familiar you are with me and my channel, this one might seem like a very odd placement on this list, but Bloodsport was actually the very first rated R movie I ever saw. In 1988, my family moved from Texas to California, and then summer 1989, we went back to California to visit for a week. I went over to my buddy's house to do a sleepover, and his parents had rented Bloodsport, this 1988 Jean-Claude Van Damme tournament fighter film, and I have loved it and martial arts movies ever since, and it's still one of my go-to put it on when I'm going to bed movies. I mean, I've put this movie to go on to bed in the last 4 months probably 6 times or something like that. It's still a movie that just kind of gets put on. Now, I don't watch it from beginning to end like I do a lot of these other ones, but as a movie I just put on as just nice comfort, go to bed movie watching. This is one of my go-to films, and certainly cheesy 80s tournament fighter martial arts film, but actually did a really nice job of showcasing multiple martial arts and stuff like that. And as a fan of the genre, I think it holds up. If it's not your genre, you'll probably watch it and be like, what on earth is it? What is Sean talking about? Also has a young Forrest Whitaker in it. That's kind of fun. But yeah, this is one of these, seems like pretty random movie, but I watch it all the time. Next up is Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I've said it many times before, but I'm a huge Star Trek fan. Back in the 90s, I didn't go to Comic Cons. I went to Star Trek conventions with my mother and my sister. We saw a whole bunch of the cast of Next Generation. We saw William Shatner at one, and that was my introduction to like true deep fandom as well as conventions. And I didn't go to a Comic Con until actually like 4 years ago, but I went to tons of Star Trek conventions way back in the day. And my favorite of the Star Trek movies, like most true Star Trek fans, is Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, that just did such a great job of continuing the television show, understanding the characters, acknowledging the fact that they're getting older, and telling a story that ties all those elements together while being exciting and being memorable. It's a movie that growing up, the Paramount Theater in downtown Austin they would do these kind of summer movie nights, and they would show older movies. And so my mother, sister, and I went to go see this movie on the Congress Avenue in Austin, Texas, way back like 1992 or something like that. So I saw it on the big screen way back in the day. And then just back in 2016, I believe, they did a showing at that same exact theater, the Paramount, and William Shatner did like a Q&A surrounding it. So my wife and I went to go see it. So I've seen this one a couple of times on the big screen at the Paramount Theater. And I mean, this is like a 100-year-old theater. It has a balcony. It has those old-timey booths for the rich people to watch the plays and stuff like that. And that's where I've seen this movie twice on the big screen. And then I've watched it, like a bazillion times at home. Back in like 2002, they released a DVD with amazing special features. The run that they did for the original Star Trek movies in the early zeros, great set of DVDs, and Star Trek 2 is probably the best one because it was a movie with such a rich background to it of bringing in Nicholas Meyer to do the movie. So I've watched that's probably the special features that I've rewatched the most time, might be the Star Trek 2 ones from that DVD release around that time. Bringing us into the top 5 is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Now, I actually don't remember entirely if I did or did not see this one in the theater, but this was my on-ramp to the Indiana Jones movie as I was starting to get into movies, into fandom, even as like a little 8-year-old, 7-year-old when it came out, and looking for anything adventure-esque, and I'd seen the posters and stuff. So I saw this one sometime around when it first came out, and have loved it ever since. I probably prefer Raiders of the Lost Ark, but my wife prefers this one, so this is the one that I've rewatched the most times over the last 14 years that we've been married. And of course, it's a great movie in its own right. If Raiders of the Lost Ark didn't exist as the greatest adventure film of all time, then Last Crusade would be there as the greatest adventure film of all time. And speaking of birthdays, yesterday was Sean Connery's 90th birthday, which is pretty wild. He's 90 years old, and he was such a great addition to this franchise. Even though he's only 12 years older than Harrison Ford, he was able to believably pull off being Indiana Jones' father. They had great chemistry. They were so fun. They were so funny, and it gave the movie even a little bit more heart than the previous editions of the franchise. And so it's one that's just a delightful film with amazing adventure set pieces and a great cast. And I've been watching it now for 31 years. Number 4 is Aladdin. In certain senses, both Aladdins kind of. So as I've mentioned multiple times in this video, was a child of the early 80s, so I was the perfect age for the Disney Renaissance, the era of Disney films that started with The Little Mermaid, includes Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, but the ones that were the prime era for me was from The Little Mermaid to The Lion King. All of those movies I saw in the theater, owned them, watched them on repeat. Little Mermaid, the one I watched the fewest times, but that's the one I actually remember seeing in the actual theater, I believe at North Cross Mall here in Austin. I believe that's a real memory. Maybe it's made up since it was 31 years ago. But Aladdin was the one that was probably nearest and dearest to my heart at that time period. I had the original cassette tape for the soundtrack when it came out that I had on loop, would listen to my buddies, and we'd sing along, all that fun stuff. It was the original version. They had to change the lyrics to Arabian Nights because they were wildly offensive, and I had the original one that had the wildly offensive lyrics to them, and then I had the movie on VHS, and because, it was an adventure story about a guy, magic powers, genies, of course, Robin Williams, hilarious, that was the one at the time that I watched the most and had on repeat. Real quick, before I give you my top 3 most rewatched movies of all time, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. What are those movies that you rewatch the most? Not necessarily your favorites, but those movies that have been around with you your whole life, that you've watched the most times, that you have the most stories about that you want to share. Also, remember, I have a companion video to this over on my Patreon page with 12 more of my movies that I've rewatched the most times, with more stories just like this video, and you can find out about my childhood, what my movies my wife and I watch. Join over on Patreon at any level. You can unlock that video, as well as like 100 more exclusives over there. Actually, over 100 exclusive videos at this point in time. In third place is Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Another action movie classic, a movie that I, of course, absolutely love. If you're even mildly familiar with my channel, you know that I love, Terminator 2, and it's an incredibly rewatchable movie that has some humor in it, it has fantastic action, and has a ton of heart. So way back in, I believe, 1992, a year after it came out, I was I don't even remember what city I was in, but it was for a family reunion, and my mom's cousin Ronnie insisted that my mother let me watch the movie Terminator 2. And she's like, are you rated R? Are you sure this is a good idea? And I have all these memories of being at this family member's house, going into their basement and watching Terminator 2 for the very first time because Ronnie fought for the right to do that. On the off chance you're watching this, Ronnie, I haven't seen you in about 15 years, but thank you so much for that very wise decision that has changed the trajectory of my life as I now talk about movies like Terminator 2. But ever since that day, I've loved it. I loved it that day. I thought it had, I just thought it was amazing. And I hadn't seen the original Terminator at that point in time, so I believe based off of my memory combined with my sister's memory, then we went back to my aunt's house, Donna, and we watched the original Terminator late at night in the dark, which was interesting because my mom didn't know that there was a little kinkiness going on in that movie, and so that got a little bit interesting as that scene came on, and my mother decided to run forward and try and fast forward the film. But of course, this is one of those movies that I love and have been watching ever since Ronnie convinced my mother it was a good idea. Our runner-up is Die Hard. I believe that this is the greatest straightforward action movie of all time. If you throw in sci-fi action and stuff like that, it gets complicated because obviously I love Terminator 2 as well. But if you remove all the subgenres and just say straightforward action movies, Die Hard is number one. And you know you found a good person to marry when they agree with you that Die Hard is a movie that you have to watch every December as well as a couple of other times throughout the year. So my wife turned out to be a good one because she's always in the mood to watch Die Hard. So we watch that movie probably 3 times every single year. Frequently shows at some of our local theaters in December, so we've seen it in the theater a couple of times. That's a fun movie to watch in a packed theater because everybody knows all the lines and there's just an energy when you watch it. But just a great, well-crafted movie with interesting characters, great performances, and a movie that just works on every single level it's going for. But coming in at number 1, I couldn't pick just one, the original Star Wars trilogy. My childhood was so much defined by watching these movies constantly. I had all of the toys and played with them, Millennium Falcon, the whole deal. I had the cassette tapes that went along with the books. Still actually have some of the cassette tapes and still some of the books too that my mom's found at her house and given to me over the years. And then I believe it was like 1995, they did the final THX release of the original trilogy with pre-special edition. But before all that stuff.
For those who remember, for those who will never forget.
And it had these Leonard Maltin interviews on it. And I watched those videos on repeat. I knew every word of the interviews. I knew every word of the movies themselves. And it was pretty cool little interviews because at the time that stuff wasn't as common. We didn't have the internet to have stuff like that. You had George Lucas talking about him working on the special editions, which itself was like, what? He's going to add deleted scenes into movies? We were super pumped. As it turns out, it wasn't such a great idea after all and hasn't been well for the history of the original trilogy. But at the time, it was exciting. And he was like, yeah, I'm writing episode 1. We're going to do the prequel trilogy. We're going to go back and what? He's doing more Star Wars movies. And so like I just watched, and he talked about the origin of how he wrote the movies. A fictionalized version of it that doesn't correspond to any evidence as to what actually happened in reality. But he told the story. I knew every word to all of it because I watched these VHS tapes so much. I don't know which one I watched the most, and I wasn't going to have like 1, 2, and 3 be the entire trilogy. So I cheated the list just a little bit so I could have all 3 of them here because that's kind of the way they worked for me. But like many of you, Star Wars was my childhood. I watched those movies on repeat, so they come in at number 1. Remember, if you did enjoy this video and want more like it, there is a companion video to it over on Patreon with 12 more of my most rewatched movies of all time. If you enjoy this channel, there's a ton of additional stuff over there, over 100 exclusives at this point in time, both edited videos and live streams. Check it out at that link down below, and thank you so much for watching.